Good evening and welcome to the March 2025 transmission of Galactic Terrors, the online reading series that scours the known universe for scary stories, strange tales, weird horror, and all sorts of literary oddities from the most imaginative authors writing in a variety of fascinating genres. I am James Chambers, and with me is Carol Gyzander.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're excited to get some cool words flowing.
Yes, we have a wonderful lineup of readers tonight. Joining us are STEVEN VAN PATTEN, SAM REBELEIN, and JO KAPLAN.
Yes, I'm excited. And the time has changed for those of us watching in the United States. So it was later. And tonight is supposed to be the blood moon, right? I guess in certain areas it's showing bright red out there. It's a full moon. So that's kind of
cool.
Yeah,
this is how much I've had my head down lately, is I didn't know about that until we were just chatting before going going live here. And I have to say, the phrase blood moon does make me want, there's a couple of different directions that could go. And, it could be a horror story, or it could just be a really uncomfortable pants dropping, I don't know, but
yeah, I think I may just put a turtleneck on and be safe. That
exactly, yes. But I may try and get out later and see if I can spy any of the eclipse, although I think it might be a little cloudy here tonight. So
maybe somebody will show us a picture, that's right. That's always good.
That's always safe.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
Well, for those of you who have been here before, welcome back. We appreciate you supporting Galactic Terrors. For those joining us for the first time, welcome to Galactic Terrors, and we hope that you will enjoy this evening's broadcast. And if you want to follow future transmissions, click like and subscribe below on the YouTube machine, and that will do all sorts of magical things. No, mainly it will just let you know when we have new broadcasts coming up, but I think that's kind of magical. And if you're not big on automated prompts, you could just remember Galactic Terrors every second Thursday of the month
at 8 o'clock.
At 8 p.m. Eastern time, whether that's daylight or savings. We're stubborn that way.
We'll try to
or you can sign up for our newsletter, and we'll put that link in the chat soon.
Yeah. And you guys know we don't send excessive numbers of newsletters, and it has nothing to do with whether I've forgotten or not. No, nothing to do.
You forgot? I mean,
what? No, nobody likes to get too many emails. After when you get a nice number of them, you want to open them. If you get too many, it's like too much. Take it back.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Well, we have been busy. A lot of us. We are the New York chapter of the Horror Writers Association, and quite a few of our members were active and participated in the first Long Island Convention of Horror, which was in Hauppauge, New York, earlier this month. And it was an interesting event, and we're looking forward to next year's. They're already booking stuff. So if you're interested in attending, it was not just books, and it was not just movies, and it covered quite a few different kinds of media, right, Jim? It was neat.
Yeah, it was great. It was the full horror universe: art, jewelry, costuming, food, books, comics, film. Lots of great panels, and I'm going to give one of our chapter members, Charles Baruch. He's waving. That's about all he's capable of after doing programming for Long Island Convention of Horror. But we'll give Charles a big shout out for doing a great job putting panels together, and a big shout out to Patrick Kennedy, who's the prime organizer behind Long Island Convention of Horror. And they've announced dates for 2026 and 2027, and hopefully it will build into a really great Northeastern horror convention.
Yeah, and they're already looking for booking guests and taking vendor registrations. So if you're interested in more about it, I will give you this website here. I'll put it in the chat. It's easy to remember because it's lihorrorcon.com.
Charles has recovered enough to take a bow.
Excellent.
Well done. Oh, and there's an addendum.
Falling over in the process.
Stop. Falling over in the process. That sounds about right. Yes. Well, we have a lot of other great conventions coming up in horror this year too, right? I think we have one.
Scares That Care is coming up, and that's a book sale event with also paneling and readings and such like that. And the really cool thing about it, it's a charity event, and it takes place on March 28th through 30th in Williamsburg, Virginia, and it benefits the nonprofit charity that's called Scares That Care, founded in 2006. The charity to date has raised and donated over $300,000 to organizations and families with either a child affected by illness or someone with burns or women fighting breast cancer. So if you're anywhere near the Virginia area, please stop in, load up, and bring your book bags because there's so many books available. It's incredible. It's a good thing I drive a car when I go there. So I know several of us will be there. I'll be there, and I believe Sam, who's reading with us tonight, will be down. It scares there as well. So
yeah, it's a fun time. Tons of books, and really does a great job helping people out, helping people in need, which is nice. Which is one of the things the horror community is particularly good at, I think. But unfortunately, I won't be at Scares That Care this year, but I will be at our next big horror convention coming up in June, StokerCon, June 12th to the 15th in Stamford, Connecticut. And we'll throw that link in the chat. I think most of the folks on here probably know what StokerCon's all about, the HWA's annual convention and home of the Bram Stoker Awards. And hopefully we'll see some familiar faces there.
Yes. I'm not going to lie. It's my favorite convention of the whole year. Great programming, and there's great people, and there's too many things to do at any given moment. So, and
we're trying to figure out how to add more to the schedule.
Wow.
Hopefully we'll be able to clone ourselves by.
I was going to say, whose cloning machine are you going to use? Yeah. Yeah, that could be cool. Neat.
So what do you say? Shall we jump into our readings?
I think that would be really kind of cool. Let's do that.
All right. Our first reader tonight is STEVEN Van Patten, a Brooklyn native. Steven is the author of the critically acclaimed Brookwater's Curse trilogy that features an 1860s Georgia plantation slave who becomes law enforcement within the vampire community. Killer Genius, his other series, features a titular character who is a hyper-intelligent Black woman using modern-day technology as a socially conscious serial killer. Steven's well-reviewed short fiction includes contributions to nearly a dozen horror anthologies, including the Bram Stoker Award-nominated Under Twin Suns, the award-winning Hell at the Way Station, Even in the Grave, and multiple appearances in Soul Scream Antholozine. He is also a contributing writer for the Extra Credit YouTube channel and has been responsible for episodes featuring a wide range of topics, from Billie Holiday and Medgar Evers to sleep paralysis demons. He's easy to find on Facebook, but goes by @SVP Thinks on Instagram. When he's not writing, he works as an Emmy-nominated stage manager for various television shows in New York City. Along with being a member of the New York chapter of the Horror Writers Association, he's a member of the Directors Guild of America and professional arts fraternity Gamma Chi Phi, I think.
Gamma Chi Phi, yeah.
Chi Phi, okay.
I had to ask that one too, Jim.
Gamma Chi Phi. Sorry, Stephen. And his website is www.laughingblackvampire.com. Let's welcome Steven.
Hi, everybody. So a couple of quick apologies. I'm actually broadcasting from an office in Midtown because I wasn't going to be able to make it home in time. But we're going to make the best out of that anyway. So what I decided I would read for you guys tonight is a little something from Bestiary of Blood, which was edited by my good friend Jamal Hodge. And the theme of this anthology was sort of a Grimm's fairy tale, and everybody got to pick a different animal. To kind of actually make it slightly lighthearted, I picked a fruit bat as my animal. So, don't get mad at me if you're like a big zoology person and, hey, Teal, and you know something that kind of contradicts the story, because I'm really just being fun and creative with it. But anyway, I'll get started. And this is called Snuggles for Felix. And it's my short story that's, again, contribution to Bestiary of Blood. Here we go. Mating season was always a difficult time for Felix. His location in the communal tree had never been ideal. In the past, he tried to jockey for a sturdier branch, something higher with a better view. He'd only ended up bullied back to something smaller, and to think the other male fruit bats had the nerve to call themselves his friends. Because of the way the male fruit bats treated Felix, the lady bats would often be worse to him. Forget visiting his branch. Most days they wouldn't even speak to him except to ask him to slide over so they could get to another of the males. His was a life of irony, living in a communal tree without ever feeling any warmth from his community. One day, when the screeching and carrying on of everyone else in the tree loving one another became too much, Felix decided he'd had enough. Without a word to anyone, he stretched out his 4-foot wingspan, which was a little shorter than everyone else's, and took flight. He didn't know where he was going and had no plan whatsoever. He only knew he'd endured enough of being ignored. As impromptu as his journey may have been, he was mindful of his changes in direction and so on. He was determined not to go back, but if, after this excursion, his only choices would be starvation or being eaten by some hawk, then he'd have to face reality and go home. And there was no question he'd be able to find his way back. He may have been smaller than his so-called brothers, but he was gifted with perhaps the best navigational skills the gods had seen fit to gift a fruit bat. But these positive attributes were seldom appreciated. Unfortunately, his strength and energy waned. After what humans would consider hours of flying, Felix was finally tired and needed some place to rest. The only problem was he didn't see any trees. The landscape below him had become barren. Not one to rest on the ground, he pressed on even as pure exhaustion set in. To his left, he saw an ominous-looking cave with strange noises coming out of it. It sounded like fellow bats, but if they were bats, they spoke in a strange dialect. Knowing other bats tended to be as territorial as the ones he'd left behind, he decided not to steer in there asking for directions or help. He flapped his wings less and let the wind carry him more. It set in that he'd have to stop at some point, and he'd end up being killed by some predator before the night was over. Killed by my own stubbornness, he thought. But finally, he passed the rocky terrain and spotted, of all things, grass. And where there's grass, there's usually a tree, Felix shouted with relief. He guided himself towards the tree, even as the welcome scents of white jasmine filled his eager little nostrils. As he glided down further, his eyes and nose delivered even better news. Peaches! Yes, Felix had found a peach tree in the middle of nowhere. But it was not his most graceful landing, and after some bumping around, he settled himself on a branch. He was instantly overwhelmed. A whole peach tree to himself. He could barely believe it. In mere seconds, he made a complete mess of himself, gorging on the fruit until his tiny stomach had extended. Content for the time being, he fell asleep. His last thought before slumber being that even if he never found a mate, he had proven he didn't need the charity of the communal tree to survive. Wrapping himself up in his wings, Felix drifted off, smiling and feeling something uncommon in his normal life: confidence. Greetings. Felix had no idea how long he'd been asleep, but he was awakened by an oddly accented voice asking a very direct question. As his eyes quickly adjusted, he found himself being stared at intently by a much smaller bat with the shortest snout he'd ever seen. The unfamiliar creature hanging from a branch across from him looked as if he were looked as if a regular bat who had run into something hard while flying. Long-snouted traveler, how is it that you find yourself here in my domain? Felix blinked himself full awake and unfurled his wings. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any harm. It is no matter. You are here, and you are my guest. Despite the gracious welcome, Felix still felt anxious. These aren't your peaches, are they? I mean, I was starving when I got here. The small but ferocious-looking bat waved a wing dismissively. You need not concern yourself. I do not claim ownership of the fruits of this tree. In fact, I never eat fruit. Oh, you're more of an insect guy. Under his funny-shaped nose, the short bat smirked. Not necessarily. But, my friend, I need to ask why you have found yourself here. Felix briefly explained how he felt no love from the other inhabitants of his communal tree and how his feelings had been hurt for a long time. So I just flew and flew until eventually I was here. The smaller bat nodded considerately. How very fortunate for both of us. Felix tilted his head. How so? Because we can solve each other's problems. You see, my friend, I happen to be rather, shall we say, persuasive when it comes to acquiring mates and making friends in general. Felix was understandably intrigued. Are you saying you're willing to teach me how to talk to lady bats? The smaller, vicious-looking bat was now grinning from ear to pointed ear. Not teach. I will make you like me. That made no sense to poor Felix. Not to mention, why, after being rejected by his own kind for his size, would he want to be smaller and then stuck with a misshapen nose? Your appearance would not change, only your personality. You would become, how do you say it, more charismatic. More charismatic? Felix's mind was suddenly ablaze with images of himself back at his tree, surrounded by the lady bats. And the thought of the snuggling alone was euphoric. That sounds amazing. What do I have to do? The short-nosed bat let go of the branch and began flying toward Felix. Just stay right there. Fear filled Felix in a way it never had. Even being confronted by the biggest, meanest of the communal tree's fruit bats paled in comparison to this. All he could see were 2 rows of jagged fangs zeroing in on him. He screamed as he let go of the branch and took flight, but not before the attacking stranger grabbed hold and bit him in the back of his neck. Let go of me, Felix screamed as he tried to shake off the biter. But don't you want to be like me? Don't you want to be a vampire? A vampire? Until now, he had thought vampire bats were only a myth. Living off the blood of other animals? Who would even dream of something that horrific? No! Well, it's too late now. The vampire's voice was muffled as his little jaws tightened on Felix's skin. As the pain increased, Felix felt himself growing angry, and the more enraged he became at both his current predicament and everything that led to it, he found the strength to shake the vampire off. The bloodsucker called out to him one last time. It's too late. You are like me now. Still frightened, Felix found the resolve to stay in the air for the rest of the night. The only good thing about returning to the relative safety of the communal tree would be they probably wouldn't notice he had left. There would be no explaining himself to a bunch of bats who hadn't been worried about him in the first place. As dawn approached, so did Felix. Only as the sun's rays came over the communal tree, soft and slow, Felix, weary from his second long flight, nearly crash-landed, bumping several sleeping fruit bats until finally settling on a branch that wasn't normally his. Gathering himself higher in the tree, than he was usually allowed, he shook his head for clarity. For causing a ruckus and waking everyone else up early, he would endure the usual insults. What hit me? Was that the runt? Felix the runt. What's wrong with you? Probably ate some bad fruit, stupid head. Then finally, he heard it. A lady fruit bat's voice. Wait, something is different about him. Something about his mouth. He remembered the vampire's awful teeth and figured if he were turning into one, that would be why his mouth was different. He turned to the lady fruit bat. Isabel, that's your name, right? Isabel almost seemed to blush. Why, yes. Yes, it is. Felix let go of the branch, righted himself, and hovered in the air as he approached Isabel. When he spoke, it was as if he were possessed by a bat far more eloquent than he had ever been. Isabel, my love, let us leave these others. This past day, I have seen wonders dark and light. The world beyond this tree, I have faced a demon bat, and I have returned with a taste for the forbidden. Let me show you these wonders. Let me take you in my cold, dark embrace. 2 seconds of sheer silence ended as hysterical laughter erupted throughout the tree. What in the world was that? That's what you get for being nice to him, Isabel. Runt's feeling himself today, huh? He's good at hovering, I will say that. That's because he's so small. As Felix made his way back to the branch, the laughter continued. Alas, one fruit bat found none of this funny. Benji, the alpha fruit bat, unfurled his massive wingspan and descended from the top branch to where everyone else had gathered to taunt Felix. This idiocy ends now. Felix was finally at his breaking point. You know what, Benji? You're not the boss anymore. The laughter stopped. Surely Benji would do serious harm to Felix for the lack of respect. But since Benji was hard-pressed to see Felix as a threat, his reaction was tempered. No longer the boss? Explain why you would say such a thing. Because I'm a vampire now. At the mention of the word vampire, the crowd of fruit bats collectively gasped. Even Benji, the biggest of them, seemed shaken by the declaration. But then he drew closer to Felix, even as the others recoiled. Well, that little speech of his was very much vampire-like, one bat observed. Wait, they exist? I thought they were a myth, one of the younger bats said. They exist. They're smaller than us, but they're dangerous, an older bat shared. Well, Felix is smaller, yet another bat added. Maybe that explains it. Shut up, all of you, Benji finally bellowed. As he had gone from staring into Benji's eyes to noticing a white buildup around Felix's mouth. The same buildup Isabel had been referring to, unbeknownst to the rest of the fruit bats. You're not a vampire, you idiot. You have rabies. And I'm going to stop right there. So yeah, hope you all enjoyed that.
That was awesome. That was awesome. Yeah, rabies. Oh my God.
So, and I should point out, there's a little more to the story. And it actually kind of has a happy ending. I know it doesn't seem like we're going to a happy ending, but it actually does. So
yeah. You know, well, if we all start foaming at the mouth, you know, then we'll all be happy together, right? Yeah, that's it. That's awesome.
Well,
yeah. So I do love the fact that this anthology is talking about the beasts and how they devour each other and all this. And you picked a bat, and yet it's really intriguing. So that very cool. Very cool.
Thank you.
It's also very fun hearing you do your vampire voice, because I happen to know you write a few vampire stories, sir.
Yeah,
so,
every once in a while, yeah.
So did you have sort of fun examining the vampire issue based on what you've worked on before?
it was a nice way to, I guess, kind of twist around what I normally do,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
And and I'm also, I'm a fan of sort of anti-bullying narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, Felix, it doesn't feel like it now, but Felix actually, he ends up in a happier place in the end.
Well, and you noticed as soon as he landed in the tree, he had a little bit more moxie there. So that was kind of cool.
Moxie, yeah. And you need moxie.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So what do you think is going to happen with this anthology? There's so many cool people in this book, Stephen.
Yes.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yes. I know I feel like he's already won some awards and things, Jamal, for putting this rather original idea together. So I mean, who knows? It's with this sort of stuff, it's always, kind of unpredictable, but I feel like with a little publicity, this could be definitely one of the more bigger notable favorites that'll be out there.
Well, you're an awesome company. And people watching have a couple of questions for you. So
all right.
Teal wants to know, so are you a myth or just bats? But seriously, when did vampires become so central to your mystique? What was the original to you?
It's I go back to the discussion that we had about Blackula when we were in Long Island.
Yes.
At the convention.
Great panel.
It's between the movie Blackula and the Christopher Lee stuff that I used to watch with my mother as a kid before she suddenly lost her tolerance for horror movies. And I can tell you what shut her down basically was Salem's Lot. The Glick boys, scratching at the mirror. I mean, scratching at the window in the middle. Like, I think as a mother, that was kind of too much for her. So while she kind of abandoned horror, I further embraced it. And, as a kid, you need a little escapism in your life. And that's kind of where it all came from, really.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. And Penelope has a good question. Of all the tales in your arsenal, why did this story resonate with you?
Well, I think for tonight, well, first of all, I wanted to help Jamal get the word out about this anthology, so I figured this would be a good thing. And plus, this particular one is kind of a little different from what I usually do, especially considering that I'm telling a story about animals, so it's like it almost it unintentionally has like a Disney thing happening, and it was honestly, it was just kind of fun to play with.
Well, that's cool. And this sort of echoes the same question, but in a slightly different way. Let me see. Well, it doesn't want to show itself. All right. We have a question from Tanya Hornsby, and she's asking, this piece is different from your normal works, a bit humorous. How easy was it for you to write? Did you have to bend your brain?
I think one thing that I like to do, even when I'm writing something really way scarier than this, is I do like to provide witty banter. And growing up as a kid in Brooklyn, you had to know how to like snap, play the dozens. People said something about your moms, you had to say something back, and that kind of thing has always stuck with me. And anytime I get a chance to do like a little insult battle in the story, I'll do it. That's
and Felix was going there. Felix was going there, when he came back and he's talking to the big boy. Yeah, that was fun. Well, listen, thank you so much for sharing this. It was really fun to hear it in your voice. It's going to be great to read the book, but I love hearing your voice doing the thing. So thank you so much. And please hang out and come back at the end and tell us about what you have coming up too. Okay. That'd be great. Thank you. All right. I'd love to have our next reader come on and join us. Sam REBELEIN lives in Poughkeepsie, New York, where he writes spooky fiction and works as a professional tutor in the Writing Center at Dutchess Community College. His debut novel, Edenville, was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award and won a Wonderland Book Award for Best Novel. Sam's first collection of interconnected short fiction, The Poorly Made and Other Things, is set in the same fictional upstate New York county as Edenville. He also has a novel coming in fall 2025 called Galloway's Gospel, which is set in the same world as well. For more about Sam's work, follow him on Instagram at RebelSam94. Sam?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the intro, Carol. It's a pleasure to be back here on Galactic Terrors. Last time I was here, this is kind of fun. This is like a deep cut, well, like a medium deep cut. But when I was here, I was still working on editing The Poorly Made, and at that time, it had like the possibility of an extra interstitial chapter. Through the stories are all connected, but through each story, there are these emails that this woman is sending to her brother, and she's trying to piece together the history of this cursed county in which they grew up. And there was like an additional chapter that I was thinking of adding to that I read at the last Galactic Terrors that now only exists in the public domain in that reading. So if you want a little bonus, you can go check that out in the archive. There's no particular order to these books. Now that the second one in the world is out, people often ask or like definitively say like, well, I read them out of order. I read Poorly Made first, and then I read the Edenville. Not true. There is no order. I wrote Poorly Made first, but Edenville was published first. You could read either one and then do the other one. Galloway's Gospel will be its own kind of entree into the world. So when that comes out in September, you could read that one first. It doesn't matter. It's not a series. It's a world that you can sink into and never claw your way out of. But today I am going to read just the first, I don't know, probably not the first half or so. We'll see how far I get into it. But the first bit of one of the stories in The Poorly Made and Other Things. This story is called So My Cousin Knew This Guy. And this is really best served if it's overheard at a very low-key backyard hang in the summer. Crickets, there's fire smoke in the air, you got a Corona in hand, don't forget the lime, but this will do. Bill was just starting to get into meditation, trying to relax a little, He was a managing editor or something over at the Lillian Journal, and they were always rushing issues to print, so it was super fucking stressful. Like every day, this guy Bill had some big new problem show up on his desk that he had to look at. Shit like the front page would be organized all wrong. And if Bill didn't figure it out, the issue would go to print and everyone would buy this wrong page. I mean, that's got to be nuts, right? Super stressful. But then Bill sees this thing on Facebook about meditating and clearing your mind and shit. So Bill figures he'll pick it up. Half an hour before bed every night. Lower his blood pressure, easy peasy. He's got himself a pretty good setup, too, from what my cousin tells me. He has a space cleared in the middle of his living room, a nice rug all laid out. He sits down on the floor with his legs all crossed, this expensive candle burning, little pillow, because he's got this thing with his lower back. I mean, same. He puts his hands in his lap, palms up, and he closes his eyes, and he breathes. And he does that for like 20 minutes. But he has trouble focusing. I mean, everybody does when you start out, but Bill has a very short attention span. He's super impatient, so he really has trouble focusing. And after a few weeks, Bill just gives up. My cousin says Bill goes to a mutual friend of theirs who's been meditating for years. I think he even owns his own yoga studio or something up in Lillian. I know, bougie. My cousin and Bill both live up that way. It's fucking nice. Anyway, Bill asks this guy for advice, something to help him focus. And the guy's like, well, just stare at the backs of your eyelids. And Bill is like, holy shit, that's exactly what he needed to hear, because he realizes that's his problem. He needs something to stare at. All day long, he's staring at layouts and copy edits and shit on his computer. And then at night, when he goes to meditate, suddenly his eyes are closed and he's not staring at anything. That's why he can't focus. His brain needs something to look at. He'd try focusing on his breath, his body. My cousin says he even told Bill to focus on his butthole, like, you know, the like deep center of your fucking body, but nothing's working. So when this yoga guy is like, well, just stare at the backs of your eyelids, Bill's like, duh. So that night, he sits down to meditate, gets himself all set up with his candle, his little pillow. He had some incense this time because he figures, what the hell? He gets this shit that's supposed to activate his root chakra, but it just makes him sneeze, so he snuffs it out and throws away the whole pack. Then he sits down again, shuts his eyes, and he just stares at the backs of his eyelids. And he does that for like 20 minutes. And it kind of works. He feels calm. He feels good. His brain is almost empty. All the stress from his job and his life just floats away. But then it starts to freak him out because he realizes, oh my God, I'm always seeing things. I mean, think about it. When you close your eyes, you're not seeing anything, right? Not true. Your eyes are still working, still seeing. They're just seeing black because it's your fucking eyelids. It's all dark. But your eyes are always on, always sending data to your brain, even if that data is just static or like those little patches of color you get when you close your eyes too hard. This whole idea freaks Bill out, drives him nuts. Every time he closes his eyes, he thinks about it. No matter what, whether he's at work or home or even asleep, he's always looking at stuff. He will never be able to turn it off. Well, it drives him up the goddamn wall. He can't even sleep that night. Just keeps staring at the backs of his eyelids. So he goes back to his yoga pal and he's like, look, the staring thing didn't work. And the guy's like, oh, why not? And Bill's like, well, I just want to shut my eyes off. I mean, I want to be totally zen. I don't want to see anything, even my fucking eyelids. Although I have to say, I don't think Bill said fucking because my cousin says Bill's kind of a goody-goody, like tightly wound, you know, total neat freak, borderline OCD. Probably why he freaked out so much when he couldn't get zen, you know? He's used to being in control. So the yoga guy thinks about this for a second and he goes, well, you want to shut your eyes off? And Bill's like, yeah. And the guy goes, well, you know, once you transcend your body and enter a complete meditative state, the physical plane presented to your eyes is really, and Bill's basically like, oh, fuck you, or whatever he says, and he walks away. Okay, a couple weeks go by, and Bill cannot focus. He tries again every night, puts his little pillow on the floor, lights his fucking candles, sits there with his legs crossed, and he stares at the backs of his eyelids, try not to think about it, focusing on his butthole. But he does think about it. He can't stop thinking about it, about how he's still seeing something literally all the time. Can't sleep, can barely blink. Work is getting insane. Too many fuck-ups going on, too much for Bill to look at. Dude is losing control. In fact, he's thinking of quitting. He's got enough money saved up from this trust fund he had. He could take like 5 years off and be okay. I know, everyone in Lillian is fucking bougie. Anyway, something about all that, about how pissed he is that he can't focus, how he's thinking of quitting his job and this ulcer he's getting. I mean, the dude is just not zen. This makes Bill think, well, why don't I just get rid of my eyes? Okay, now, my cousin is a doctor. Actually, Dylan. You guys know Dylan. You met him at that thing with the Stacy's thing last summer. Come on, you remember Stacy. Yeah, with the hair. Yeah. Anyway, Dylan's like a surgeon, and Bill comes up to him and he's like, listen, Dylan, I want you to take out my eyes. And Dylan's like, I'm sorry, what? I want you to take out my eyes. And Dylan's like, no fucking way, man. You're crazy. But Bill says he'll pay him a lot. And he'll owe him a huge favor. But Dylan says, I'm not going to take out your eyes, man. Why would I do that? Well, Bill gets this weird look on his face. Like his eyes are on fire, heating him up from the inside, melting his skull from their sockets, burning Bill's brain. And he says, I just want to be zen, man. I haven't relaxed since I was like 20. And he's about 45 now, so that's a long time. For once in my life, he says, I just want to be calm. I mean, it's kind of sad, dude. He lives by himself. No pets, no girlfriend. Dylan says he doesn't even know if Bill has a lot of friends. He just has his job. His job sucks. And now he wants to be able to meditate. I mean, he's desperate. Dylan feels bad for the guy, which is why he agrees to cut out his eyes. They do it in the hospital Dylan works at late at night when nobody's really around. I mean, there are nurses on duty and shit, but they don't notice anything. Bill and Dylan just pop into one of the surgery rooms in one of the smaller like wings that people don't really go in. Bill hops on the table, Dylan sanitizes his hands, and they go at it. Dylan says the procedure didn't take that long. First, you use this special kind of forceps to hold the eyelids open. Then you take these tiny scissors and you snip away the membrane that covers the eyeball. You move in curves around the pupil and cornea, just taking tiny snips. The jelly is apparently super thin, like that part in Goodfellas when they're in jail and cutting garlic with razor blades. So you just slide the scissors up and down, super careful, sawing off thin slices from the front of the eye. Then there are these like rectus muscles all around the eyeball, which you have to kind of hook into. There's 4 of them, and they take the longest. Dylan said he just sawed at them with a scalpel, blood spurting up at him and shit. Dylan didn't know exactly what he was doing because he's mostly like a foot surgeon, and he doesn't really work at the hospital. He works next door. But he says it was easy enough to figure out. He just had the forceps in one hand, and he was looking at diagrams on his phone with the other. I mean, he went to school for this shit, kind of. So after you get those rectus muscles, you have to sever these other 2 muscles. Got to shift the eye to the sides to reach them. Dylan says he just sort of squished it with his thumb, popped it out. You yank these other 2 muscles up with a different hook and snip them to. You're supposed to leave something called like a hemiostat in there for a while so they don't bleed out. But Dylan forgot, so there was blood everywhere. It got into Bill's mouth, and he woke up just choking, started screaming, twisting his hands around, making these little fists, just moving his fingers. It took Dylan a whole minute to put him back under. You imagine you wake up and you have shit in your face like that, little scissors and hooks swinging around out of your eyes. Yeah, hard pass. Anyway, once that's all done, you wiggle the eye back and forth with some forceps until you find the optical nerve. You cut that, cauterize with a special little torch. Dylan just used his big lighter and yanked the whole thing out. Dylan put the eyes in a jar of pickle juice. He strung a wire through it, popped a shade on top, turned it into a table lamp. He keeps it in his living room on a side table by the couch. He thinks it's the funniest shit. Bill watching him while he does paperwork. I saw it once. It was weird. When he told me all this, I asked Dylan why. Like, isn't that super fucked up to just put some dude's eyes in a lamp? But he just laughed and said, wait, it gets better. And it does. So if you want to see exactly how it gets better, you can check out So My Cousin Knew This Guy in The Poorly Made and Other Things. And I will say, as a quick fun fact to end this little reading, So My Cousin Knew This Guy is in sort of the smack dab middle of the collection because I thought it would be sort of a throwaway story. It got rejected so many times over the course of years. In fact, a lot of the stories in here got rejected so many times over the course of years until they finally were initially published with the actual book. But a lot of people have said that So My Cousin Knew This Guy is their favorite in the book, which is a very pleasant surprise. So if you want to see what everybody's raving about, check out The Poorly Made and Other Things wherever books are sold today.
Thank you, Sam. That was fantastic. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You can never predict which stories are going to really connect with readers or which are going to resonate and the readers are going to not hang up on, but get caught up in, I should say,
Sure.
without a collection. But man, that is gruesome. And I love the voice of that story, the very conversational. I mean, everybody's heard a conversation that started that way. So I know this guy, it's like, everybody's got the cousin who's done something crazy. What is it about stories that involve amateur surgery though, that are just so much fun? He's
I mean, surgery has always been kind of icky to me because I stuck my arm through a glass door when I was 4 and I fucked up the nerve bundle and I had to have surgery there. So I think it's just in my body that surgery is kind of a I already used the word icky, but just kind of an intense thing,
traumatic.
I was always afraid of needles as a kid, even getting blood drawn to this day. So I don't know. I think it's just putting yourself at the mercy of someone else and having such trust in someone and having that trust fall go awry that always, you know, attracts people to like amateur surgery horror. I don't know. Does that seem fair to say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds to me like, you know, there's a little bit of your own fear in this story. In
Yeah,
that
oh,
sense.
for
Yeah,
sure.
the uncomfortableness and the, you know, I think even, you know, most people can relate to this guy's effort to establish or achieve Zen, and he just keeps getting distracted by the most insane ideas and can't unfixate on them, which is just a wonderful progression in the story.
It feels even more topical now. I mean, I wrote this primarily in 2018, but sort of like going back over it with the last couple months in mind, it feels especially topical. Everyone, I think, is just trying to be as zen as possible as we slide into the abyss, you know.
Yeah,
So
definitely a difficult state to achieve these days.
yeah, yeah.
But we do have a question from Teal. So Sam, this is what you chat about in those backyard summer afternoons. And also, what led you to write this story?
I genuinely don't remember. This is maybe the only one in this collection that I don't quite remember the genesis of. I remember being really interested in what is the word? Inoculation stories or enucleation, right?
Oh yeah, enucleation, where the eye is
Enucleation. Yeah,
removed.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I remember sort of looking at diagrams and watching videos. And I think maybe it was like the beginning of an exercise in writing my first piece of like true body horror, and sort of seeing like, okay, well, how do other people, like, what's the research that someone else, like, what's the research that a professional writer would do? And how would they make this feel as realistic as possible? So I think, like many stories in this collection, it started as an exercise. The other one that people really love is My Name is Ellie, which also started as an exercise to like to have a story where every sentence starts the same way and is kind of constructed the same way. So I don't know, but that's I don't remember what the like exact image or whatever was that started this, but I think everyone like has some kind of experience like that where you're at a gathering of some kind and you get sucked into this conversation and you're like, how do I stop hearing this story? Like I remember being in college and like being at this party where this guy was talking about, all of a sudden was like, yeah, one day I shoved 50 marbles in my ass, and I was like, how do I not hear anymore?
Right. Too much information.
Yeah, so I think that's just a like kind of simple human thing that a lot of people can connect with. But,
Yeah, definitely. And on a tangential note, I'm a long time comic book collector, and there's a whole subcategory of comic book people. It's dwindling, I think, in population that collects what's called injury to eye covers and comics with injury to eye panels. There are famous ones where, you know, there's a hypodermic needle being plunged into the eye. It's like
man.
they go out and look for those. So you're not the only one obsessed with enucleation.
Good. It's good to not be alone. You know,
Yeah.
all you other weird eye people out there, I see you. I respect you.
No pun intended. I see you.
Yeah, truly.
So the title, The Poorly Made and Other Things. First of all, the Poorly Made sounds like a great band name.
Yeah, I would go to their shows for sure.
Yes.
In some like shitty warehouse in Brooklyn.
Yeah, you could picture it, but it's really an apt title for a horror collection, I think, because so much of horror grapples with you know, flaws in humans or monsters that are only monsters because they are not properly formed or properly made. Was that anything that what you were, you know, is that one of the themes you were looking at with this?
Yeah, originally, I've talked about this a lot before, but the nightmare that begins Edenville was part of a longer nightmare that I had in like 2017. And that single nightmare spawned a lot of this world, because that was where I saw the sketch of the Renfield Giant, and I saw the Gummer folk in that nightmare and all that stuff. But in the original nightmare, there was some kind of dream link between the Gummer folk and this idea that certain people were poorly made in and of themselves. And so the very early drafts of Edenville were sort of circling around this idea that this metaphoric link between the main characters who felt like they were poorly made because they were dealing with codependent relationships and addiction and loneliness and all kinds of things, and the monsters that were sort of haunting them. So there was that link between like the literal poorly made people of the Gummer folk and the poorly made, quote unquote, sort of human characters. And as the world grew, those elements kind of sort of, lava lamped apart. But that was the initial connection. And there were stronger connections throughout. Like, instead of the Renfield Giant, the sort of like name that I heard from him was the Pencil Man, which doesn't make it like, that's just a dream thing. So like that changed early on because I was like, what the fuck is a pencil man? But so that PM then became a big thing for the world. It was the poorly made, it was the Pencil Man. I had one of the other worlds was this place called Prejtamar, and the guy's name was Peter Marion. And so all of those elements are still in the mythos in different ways. Like if you look at Edenville, the initials CM are very prevalent. There are other weird worlds. So again, all of that stuff is sort of in there. It's just sort of been pulled apart. And so the Poorly Made as a title kind of came out of that mess.
Very cool. Very cool. And I love how it all ties together into this world that you're creating and it's kind of the backdrop of Renfield County, and especially that people can read it sort of out of order and still absorb the whole story, as you were saying earlier, which is fantastic. And if anybody's watching who hasn't read Edenville, give it a check. It's a fun book. I thought you were going to pull out a copy of Edenville. Sounds like I gotta hydrate. I can't.
Like, hey, read this. No, just some water.
That's it. Well, thank you, Sam. We'll have you come back a little bit later to talk about what's coming up next. And thanks so much for the wonderful reading.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun.
All right. So our next reader is JO KAPLAN. JO KAPLAN is the Shirley Jackson Award nominated author of It Will Just Be Us and When the Night Bells Ring. Her short stories have appeared in Fireside Quarterly, Black Static, Nightmare Magazine, Vestarian, Horror Library, Night Script, and many anthologies. In addition to writing, she teaches English and creative writing at Glendale Community College and is the co-chair of the Horror Writers Association's Los Angeles chapter. She also plays cello in the Symphony of the Verdugos and the band Guerra Paz. You can find out more about Jo at jo-kaplan.com. And welcome, Jo.
Hi, it's just me, I guess. Is one of the hosts going to join me? Okay.
Hey, Jo. No, we usually let you just go ahead and read, and then
we'll so sorry.
No, that's okay. Is that good?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. All right.
All right. Hi. I'm going to read from When the Night Bells Ring, my novel. Basically, all you need to know at this point is that we are following Lavinia Kane's diary from the 1860s. She is in a Nevada boomtown with her family. Her husband is working at the mine, and I think that pretty much sets up all the context you need to know for this section. October 11th, 1869. It has been days since I've seen another soul, apart from my own family. There is an emptiness that calls across the wild lands. You can hear it on the wind. One might almost forget there is a whole town here, how sparse its inhabitants remain. It is almost as if the land itself is haunted. No, I have to scratch that out. But there, it has already been written down. My eyes deceive me sometimes, for again, in the night, If any place should be haunted, I thought it must be some old European castle with its crumbling turrets, like one reads about in novels. Not here in the new land, the new frontier. Of course, we are not the first ones here, are we? The natives have lived here for how long, who can say? And who even before them? One thinks of this place as having no history of its own, a pristine wilderness, but that is not true. Just because there are no old castles here does not mean the land has not seen 1,000 years of life and death. And perhaps it is all the more unsettling because we do not know what was here before us, because there are no structures to inform us of religions that have come and gone, no abbeys, no ancient ruins. There is only the land and its great unbroken silence, unwilling to share its secrets. The great empty wild. That is the most haunted place of all, haunted by beings of whom we have no knowledge or understanding, haunted by virtue of its seeming emptiness. My mother would disapprove of such ideations, but so be it. This is my diary, and I will write what I like. I am not some fanciful girl reading novels and getting carried away with notions of ghosts and grand romances. What I believe are the things that I see with my own two eyes. And this is why, when in the night I glimpsed a figure moving through the emptiness of that land in the moonlight, like a person grown stiff, one whose limbs move as if locked at the joints, my heart almost leapt straight from my body. When I looked again, I could not find the creature. But shortly thereafter, as I continued to strain my eyes on the black horizon, I heard that most distant musical sound of a bell echoing in the vast reaches of the desert. And did my ears deceive me? For nothing came of it after all. I would have heard if something had happened, wouldn't I? I'm going to skip the next diary entry. All you need to know is that her husband, John Henry, who's been working at the mine, has stolen a little silver nugget and brought it home, hoping that the company won't find out. So this is the next diary entry after that. October 14th, 1869. They say it never rains, but it pours. But perhaps the opposite is also true. When the sun smiles upon you, it offers a dozen splendid smiles. For even after beholding the silver nugget and reconciling with it my former cynicism, I still never imagined he would bring home a second silver nugget, which he has. I begin to imagine what lies before us. Windows with glass in them, fancy shawls that have not grown threadbare. We will travel somewhere new by locomotive, and in the dining car we will feast on roast turkey with cranberry sauce, or lamb with mint, and on other such delicious morsels. The children will have new shoes and their own bedrooms with beautiful four-poster beds. For this second nugget's significance lies in more than its worth and weight. John Henry has told me that once he had found his fortune, we might leave this place for greener pastures. I reminded him and suggested we might begin to think of where we should like to go. John Henry only guffawed and directly dismissed the idea. Leave? When there are so many more riches waiting to be plucked from the earth right here? As long as no one is aware of my taking a bit extra for my trouble, why should we leave? There will be more for us if we stay. I must not allow my joy to be twisted up in misery. Yet this is what happened in Boston, isn't it? He kept taking and taking until finally we had no choice but to leave. And I fear now the same will happen here. I fear ours is an ill-gotten joy, and like the strange lady herself, John Henry's is a thirst that shall never be slaked. October 15th, 1869. Can it be that good fortune is always met swiftly by tragedy? Another death, and it is altogether too awful to think. For who should the victim be this time but an innocent child? Worse, worse. Unlike with Jeremiah Frost, whose death I only heard of, this time I saw the body, and it was even more horrible than I could have imagined. I saw the tiny puncture wounds scattered all across the flesh like stars across the night sky. I saw the bloodless white of that self-same flesh. I saw the cadaverous skull, withered as if aged beyond its meager years, teeth showing in a rictus of death. Horrible, horrible. After our own little celebration last night, John Henry and I fell hard to our beds and slept deeply, until I woke with the sun and set off to town for sugar, salt pork, and coffee. John Henry and the children remained abed, as it was quite early yet, and I hoped to return home before they awoke, but I was halted by Mary Warrant and a small search party sweeping through town. Her son Peter was missing. He was a disobedient boy who liked to sneak out at night with his father's gun, and they discovered that he had done so again, only this time he had not returned. They called his name as they searched. Mrs. Warrant and her husband, along with Josephine and Cecil Pavlovsky, and several miners who worked under Mr. Warrant. I offered to help look, and we conducted ourselves down Main Street, past the horrid hanging tree, and there we split down several paths to widen the search. All along we called and called his name, and though our voices were nearly drowned by the wind itself, I was sure if he were hereabouts, he would hear us and respond. Yet we kept up calling and calling as we went. I found myself together with Mrs. Pavlovsky near the post office, and as I came around and looked to the stable that lay just behind the building, I noticed something peculiar. A foot protruding from the stable's opening, as if someone had lain down just inside the cool shade and fallen asleep there. I knew at once this was not the case, and a dreadful foreboding filled me as I stared at that still foot, which, as I looked, I ascertained could only belong to a youth. I ought to have called out to Josephine nearby or to the others farther along, but my voice was restrained by a thickness in my throat, and I could hardly croak out the barest sound. Knowing that I had to see for myself who that foot belonged to, I approached the stable, my own feet carrying me with trembling slowness, as if my body could tell I did not truly want to see what lay within that structure. Yet continue I did, and there upon the floor of the stable, limbs strewn about the hay, lay the poorest creature I have ever seen. A boy of no more than 14, dead, flesh white, pocked with innumerable tiny holes as if stung 1,000 times by 1,000 deadly hornets. I might have cried out at the sight. I cannot say whether I voiced my distress, as the moment sent all feeling rushing from my body with the horror before me. But I know that when I dared pull my eyes from the tragic sight, I became aware of an odd silence and stillness within the stable, where there ought to have been the postal service's horses. In spite of the sick fear coursing through me, I stepped farther inside to peer into each one of the stalls and see what had become of the horses. Dead. All dead. And in the same disturbing and inexplicable manner as the child, covered in small puncture wounds. Their black, glassy eyes stared through the walls, unseeing. How I managed to stumble out of that scene of death and how I managed to come across the rest of the search party escapes my memory. All that remains is a blur of awful feelings that threatened to consume me. Yet I did gain their attention and led them to the stable, which the postal operator had not even come by to check on yet this morning, and the men went in to see while Josephine and I clutched at each other, and while Mr. Warrant held his wife, whose screams and sobs choked the air as she strained against him to see her son. They found the gun nearby and a bullet hole in the stable wall, though what the boy had been shooting at remains a mystery. His presence here, too, remains a mystery. Perhaps he was sneaking into the stable to steal a horse and go for a midnight ride. Just before I left to hurry home and inform John Henry of the fresh horror that had befallen Virgil, Dr. Hartsworth came to examine the body. I nearly scoffed at the sight of him, remembering what Mr. Branson had told me of how he had learned his trade from Indians. What sort of witchcraft had he learned? Did the others know? I wondered. I left Josephine, who went to join Mr. Warrant in consoling poor Mary, and just before I found myself steady enough to walk, I heard the doctor speaking with the men of the search party. He held in his hand a most peculiar object, which he claimed to have found embedded within the flesh of the dead boy. Some sort of spine, perhaps 5 inches long, almost like one may find protruding from a cactus. I'll leave it there. All right, I was a little discombobulated at the start and throughout the reading because my cat is over here pawing desperately at the door.
Oh, yes, yes. Now, is that to come in or to go out? I don't know.
He wants to go out.
Of course.
You would be surprised at how many cats have made guest appearances or otherwise interfered with Galactic Terrors
Yes.
over the
It is truly not an online event until we have at least one feline overlord. Yeah.
He opened the door to my office was closed, and he pushed it open right before I started reading and wandered in. So anyway,
no
I
problem.
started and I was like, wait, what's happening?
I
Well,
couldn't tell
thank
at
you
all.
so much for the terrific reading, Joe. Yeah,
Oh,
despite
no, that was really cool. Yeah.
cat distractions.
Well, I have to say, Joe, you already know that I love this book. And Jim, I read this right before StokerCon last year because I love echo horror, and this really has some interesting stuff in it. And then we got to meet at one of the echo horror panels at Stoker, and I was like, I love your book. So that was very fun. So I do have a question to kind of start out, though. So you've been reading the entries from the diary from the past, but there's a present timeline that goes through it as well. And I was very intrigued by how you managed to flip back and forth like that in the story. So what prompted you to do it that way? How did you like doing that?
Yeah, I always liked the way that, or I was interested in the way that sort of classic Gothic and horror fiction often sets up a frame story, like Frankenstein, right? We have the frame story with Walton, and he's in the Arctic, and he meets Victor Frankenstein, and then we get Frankenstein's actual story, and then we return to that frame story at the end. And it's kind of an interesting way, I think, of setting up especially something that's more like an epistolary story, like a diary, which again Frankenstein is. And not that I was thinking of Frankenstein specifically, but I'm teaching it this semester, so it's on my head. So I liked the idea of a frame story to set up the diary, which to me was always the main story. And so initially I was thinking about, there's this near future story, kind of apocalyptic, like climate apocalypse is happening. There are these 2 women who I call the Dust Devils, who are riding across the US to try, because it's like parts of the West have become uninhabitable. They're trying to find a place that's, has water. And they end up in this ghost town, and they think there's water somewhere in the mine. And because they're that desperate, they even comment, "You want to drink stagnant mine water?" And the other one says, "Well, it's better than drinking piss." So they go into this mine and they find this diary, and they're like, "What is this diary doing in this mine?" And so initially I was thinking that was just going to be the frame story, the setup, and then we come back to it at the end. And then I was working with my editor at the publisher, and she was like, "What if we kind of bring in more often, rather than just a couple times throughout, like more often kind of going back and forth, because their story is interesting too, and they're kind of trapped in this mine. Some scary stuff happens to them." And so I had fun doing that. I feel like I didn't flesh out their story maybe as much as I would now if I were to like come back to it. And I thought about reading a section from their, from that part of the story. For this, I was actually planning on it. And then I changed my mind because I just love the diary entries so much, and the characters and what's going on with the mystery of the people in this town being punctured in this weird way all over their bodies and bled completely dry.
Yes. Well, Lavinia is a fabulous character, and just that image of the tooth punches all over them like stars. It's like, oh my goodness.
Very cool. Well, I have not yet read When the Night Bells Ring, but it sounds to me like you're doing some historical storytelling and some predictive future storytelling. did you have to do a lot of research? And it's almost like I'm thinking like, okay, you've got to do all your historical research, and then you've got to figure out plausible futures. Was it like that?
Yeah, well, the plausible future felt way easier because like we're living in like a climate apocalypse. But they talk about the characters in the near future are coming from Los Angeles, which is where I live, and wildfires all over the place. And they reference that that's kind of what happened, is that the city sort of burned down, which hits a really close to home after this past January. But I did do a lot of research for the historical part because I wanted to really feel like it was an authentic voice. I actually always, as a writer, thought I would never write historical fiction because it seemed too daunting to me in wanting it to feel authentic. So, I tried to get as much period accuracy as I could in various details, but it was really just, I wanted it to feel authentic to a reader. So I looked up not just like what were they eating and the slang at the time, but I read like what women who were kind of on the frontier were writing diaries. What were they writing? So I read what I could find to kind of capture some of the voice that I was hearing there. I think that authentic voice is really important with historical fiction. It's one of the reasons why I like the movie The Witch so much, is because it sounds like they're really these like people in the 1600s or whatever that takes place. The way they speak feels really authentic.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Just on a quick side note, I think the director of The Witch made a movie called The Lighthouse, which he did something similar where he went into all these diaries written by lighthouse keepers of the time, and all of the dialogue supposedly was pulled, not in a chunk, but in pieces from these diaries to get that authenticity. So that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. And in all those cases, those are people that are very isolated, a lighthouse keeper or somebody who's out in the wilderness or the frontier. And so what would they write about? What would they be expressing when they're out there in the big alone? That's interesting.
Yeah, some of what I read was like the kind of description that she spends a little bit of time in the first entry that I read, where she's kind of describing the landscape and what she's kind of seeing in that. I saw a lot of that, this kind of awe at the grandeur of the wide open Western landscape, but also like this knowledge that there's so much empty space here and there's a lot of wilderness, and our place in this feels very small.
Yeah. Well, I have another question for you. I have not read your other book, It Will Just Be Us, but from what I understand, this is some like a classic kind of Gothic story, and we've got ghosts inhabiting from the past who are wreaking havoc upon the people in the present. So that's another kind of dual timeline kind of thing, or we've got the past and all. Do you see a relationship between them, or am I just
no? Yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, they're it's funny that I didn't think of that one as a historical novel, but there is completely a historical story, because there's like these ghosts or these echoes of the previous inhabitants of the house, who would help escaped slaves get into the Great Dismal Swamp, where they had their own like communities where they could be free because nobody was going to follow them into this really inhospitable place. And there's this whole backstory with that I also did a lot of research on and thought was fascinating. So I guess I do like the historical. My next novel doesn't have any historical elements.
Okay.
Well, you need a research break.
Oh, that's reasonable. Well, I really loved hearing you read it as well, because it's fun seeing it on the page or hearing an audiobook, but it's really fun hearing these stories in the author's voice, is how you intended Lavinia to sound. So that's kind of cool. Yeah. Well, that's really neat. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and then I'm just curious, because I should know this, but which of your works was nominated for the Shirley Jackson Award?
It was actually a short story. I feel like author of Shirley Jackson nominated short story that you've never heard of probably wouldn't read as better in a bio, but it was a short story called Something is Rotten for the Shakespeare Unleashed anthology.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a sequel to Hamlet, in which in Victorian era spiritualists and scientists go to Hamlet's castle to study the ghosts of the royal family that lived there, and there's intrigue and mystery and poison and creepy stuff. And yeah, I had a lot of fun writing that.
As one does, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's such a great anthology too. There's so many just wild approaches to Shakespeare in there.
Oh, it's very cool.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Well, congratulations again on that.
Thank you.
What do you think? Should we ask everybody to come back and join us? We can all talk about what you have coming up next, if you can tell us about what you have coming up next. So
Sure. All right. Let's we'll
great.
bring
Thank you.
SVP and Sam. Welcome back.
Yeah. Y'all
Yes.
look great tonight.
Oh, thank you.
That was excellent. Yeah. And I'm sorry, SVP, though. I got to call you out on one thing, because you said in Long Island, and I know you're not a Long Islander.
No, I'm not.
Nothing
On
is
Long
in Long
Island.
Island. It's on Long Island.
On Long Island. My apologies.
Oh, okay. Well, but now if you're buried there, are you in Long Island or are you on Long Island, Jim? I don't
Still
know.
on Long Island. Still on it.
Okay.
But that's and it's weird because I'm going to go on a whole diversion here, so I'll keep it short. But half of Long Island is Brooklyn and Queens, and nobody considers those Long Island. Those are the city.
That's true.
Where you are, yeah. So
yeah.
Everybody run, get your maps. Yeah.
That's it. So anyway, local pride side quest completed. Thank you.
Oh, that's fun. Oh my goodness.
So what do folks have coming up that we can keep an eye out for? Stephen, why don't you start us off, and anything we can look for on the horizon?
Well, let's see. I have a couple of short stories floating around in the ether. So it's hard to say exactly when those, because those are not under my control. But I am in the process of, and I know everybody's probably sick of hearing this, but I am in the process of finishing the 4th installment of Brookwater's Curse, the 3rd installment of Killer Genius. Myself, along with Kirk Johnson, Mark Abbott, and Denise Tapscott, who I think is on this, who's watching now. We have a group project that will be finished soon. And basically just getting stuff done and getting it out there. And I do have a Tuskegee Airmen episode that
cool.
I am in the process of finishing for that Extra Credit YouTube channel.
Excellent. And the four of you whose names you just mentioned, the Beef Wine and Shenanigans crew, you just have a new podcast episode out recently.
Yes, we had a little. Kirk Johnson had a kind of a serious medical situation, so we took a break while he healed up, and he's better now. So we just relaunched, and we actually had a really good time. It was just like, you say riding a bike. We're back in the swing of things, so that's going to be our regular thing. Yeah.
Cool.
And just real quick, give us a nutshell description of the extra credit history videos that you've written for. What's that series about?
So Extra Credit is a YouTube channel, and they tackle a number of things, all kinds of different history things, historical things. But I'll just put it plainly. When George Floyd was murdered, they kind of realized that they hadn't been covering Black history as thoroughly. I was already doing like mythological stuff for them because, I'm a spooky guy. And they kind of shifted me over and asked for a couple of Black history episodes. I think we're up to I want to say 15 now. So when Tuskegee is done, it'll be 16. So, and it's been a number of topics from Josephine Baker to Marcus Garvey and Maya Angelou, and just sort of like concise but thorough biographies of real short biographies of various figures in Black history.
And these are all little animated.
And they're animated, which makes them, we hope makes them accessible to kids.
Cool. Yeah, I've seen a number of them, and I enjoy them a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Sam, I know you just had a book come out, but we're going to ask you, what's next? That's not enough.
Throw it over your shoulder, man. What's next? Yeah.
Well, Galloway's Gospel comes out on September 16th from William Morrow. I'm really excited about this one. It's all about cults and religious fanatics and how power-hungry men will twist stories and histories for their own purposes. So, it's not timely at all. It's just, but no, that one will be fun. It cuts between two timelines. One is in 2019 and the other is in 2009. So there's a lot of like fun 2009 nostalgia. It feels weird to say that 2009 is like nostalgic, but like it's already like
16 years,
16
man.
years ago. So
I mean,
so there's
that's
a lot of fun stuff.
pre iPhone, isn't it?
It would have been like, I think the iPhone 2 maybe. So yeah. Yeah, that one will be fun. I think it's a nice triangulation of vibes between Edenville. Edenville is kind of a bonkers adventure in a strange land, and The Poorly Made is kind of a came out of a like depressed time in my life. And Galloway's Gospel, I think, has a lot of like grief and loss attached to it, but it's also just like a fun, like there's a kooky ensemble cast of characters, this entire town losing its mind to this strange cult. So I'm excited about that one. And then I have another little thing coming out sometime this fall, I believe, that I can't really talk about, but look out for more stuff. And I think that's kind of it for now. I'm in the middle of, I have another fun small thing that I also don't know if I can talk about. This is like such a tease. What a tease. But follow me on Instagram and you'll get the updates. And I'm like slogging through the first draft of what will be the next novel in the world, the Renfield County world. I've just been such a shit writer lately. So this week,
the world's on fire, so it affects us all.
Yeah. So that's coming along. But yeah, that's it.
That's great.
Awesome.
Joe, what about you? What's keeping you busy these days?
Oh gosh, what's keeping me busy? Everything. But in terms of what writing, teaching, music. But what I have coming out, my next thing is my novel, The Midnight Muse, comes out in 1 year.
Okay.
Next March. We have a ways to go. So that's not really keeping me busy so much as it is keeping me waiting. That is actually, since you were talking about amateur enucleation earlier, there is a scene of amateur enucleation in that book. So
let's go.
Yeah.
Some body horror. It's about a band whose lead singer went missing in the forest. And then a year later, the rest of the members convene at a cabin in the woods. And there's something weird out in the woods that is mimicking their singer's voice.
Ooh.
And this descends into fungus horror and body horror and all that good stuff.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. All right. And I just have to throw out there that the very first novel that I wrote is sort of an amateur detective mystery. And one of the killer's trademarks is that he scoops people's eyeballs out with a melon scooper. Yeah. So, there we go.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Did
And
not
this
have
love
this on
ways
my
to-
radar for tonight. The nucleation
Right? Oh, wow.
touch points. Yeah. Very fun.
Friends that enucleate together stay together. That's it. Jim, what's coming on in your world?
Oh, that is a good question. I, like Sam, have several things I cannot yet quite talk about. Most recently, I wrote a novella called Necropolitan for a collection of 4 novellas, or an anthology of 4 novellas called Zombie Horde, coming out from Weird House Press. and I wrote the introduction to a new edition of The House on the Borderland, which is part of their horror classics line, which is going to be published soon with beautiful color illustrations by, I believe, K.L. Turner. And other than that, lots of stuff kind of crawling its way toward announcement and publication. You know, Joe, you mentioned waiting a year for your next novel to be published, and I'm never anything less than in awe at the slow speed of the publishing wheels. They do grind very, very slowly.
Yes, isn't that the truth? That's the truth. Well,
And Carol, what about you?
I am slowly slogging through the final updates of my novel that I've worked on, and so something may come of that, and I may be able to tell you about that at some point if it does. So that's exciting. But the other fun thing is that there's an anthology that I have that's just come out called Dark Spores. We just did a show about that last month. We had a bunch of our readers on, which was very cool, and that's fungus horror, and that's very fun. And we have some events coming up in the real world in person. On Monday, March 24th, we're doing, before we get to the real world, yes, we have this coming up as a special Galactic Terrors presentation. We've got 2 events coming up for the Chaos Clock, but the Chaos Clock Tales of Cosmic Ether is steampunk cosmic horror, and it's an anthology that a number of folks from our area and elsewhere have some short stories. So we're going to have some of the readers on our show on March 24th. And we're also doing an in-person event for that at Randy Dawn's Brooklyn Books and Booze on the 3rd Tuesday of this month, which is next Tuesday. So some folks will be reading live there, which is cool. So if folks are able to join us at either one of those, that would be nifty. And we appreciate it.
Yeah, and then in April, we'll be back with our regular Galactic Terrors broadcast on April 10th, featuring Gordon Linsner, Anastasia Garcia, and Deborah K. Every.
Yes.
Reading from their work and answering your questions.
Yeah. And as always, we'd just like to share that if you want to get all these details that we're mentioning here and drop them in the chat, feel free to just sign up for our newsletter, and we will send you a very few number of email missives per month. So very cool. Well, thanks everybody. This has been really fun. You know, we had interesting voices in all 3 of these stories, which I think was just really, really cool. You know, especially since they all were different from each other and all. So I really enjoyed listening. So thank you for sharing your words. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was
you.
great. So, and good luck with all of your upcoming projects. And we'll be keeping an eye out for them and hope that Sam can announce some of those projects soon.
Never.
He'll never tell us, no.
Never.
Just for me.
Yeah, that's terrific.
And especially thanks to those of you who joined us here tonight for the readings.
Yes.
And, you know, we hope to have you back for future Galactic Terrors transmissions.
Yes, and as always, thanks to Lou Rera, who does our graphics. So Lou does an awesome job with all this stuff. Thanks, Lou. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks. And everyone have a great night.